record the session and begin the second piece, which is on responsive general operating support grants. In the past, those of you may remember that there were responsive grants that were other than general operating support. We have changed them all now to general operating support. I'm Jackie Downing. I'm the Director of Grant Making and Nonprofit Support at the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this portion of the nuts and bolts session. We're going to take questions at the end because we have a lot to get through. This is very specific to this application, to just the responsive general operating supports. If you have questions, please drop them in the question and answer. My colleague Stephanie Chung will be monitoring that, and we'll be able to get to those questions at the end if we have not already answered them. And we'll look forward to hearing those questions and hope that we can answer them in advance. And moving on.
Thank you, Jackie. Good morning. I'm Valerie Knight-Ganji. I'm the Program Officer for the Valley Community Foundation, and I'm going to be talking about the competitive grant eligibility for the general operating support process. Applicants must be tax exempt orgs for under the section 501c3 or have a fiscal sponsor for this particular grant. Applicants must provide services in at least one of our 20-town region or one of the 5 Valley towns. Applicants must adhere to a policy of non-discrimination. And applicants who are previous recipients of a grant within the past 3 years must make sure that they have submitted all required reports. Projects that do not generally receive consideration include religious activities, endowment campaigns, previously incurred debt, and funding deficits. Requests for capital projects such as building, vehicles, and other depreciable items will be accepted only as part of the small grants program and may include requests that are related to organizations managing the impact of COVID-19. Applicants who are past grantees must be in compliance with all grant reports.
So as we move through this application, these you will not see as direct questions in the application, but we wanted to share these with you. These are the guiding principles for nonprofits. These are our guiding principles for grant making. These are what the foundations have as our core beliefs. And we try to see these attributes in nonprofits. We see that the most successful nonprofits are those that can have these and can share these with us. First is a vision for the community. You have to have a clear set of goals and objectives for how what you do will impact the community you serve during the term of the grant. And those goals have to be informed by a planning process that includes input by stakeholders with lived experience. We want to make sure that the people that you're working with have a say in what you're doing. We hope that you have an eye on the social and structural determinants of equity. That's health access and quality, education access and quality, basic needs, social and community context, economic stability, neighborhood and built environment. You have to determine how your mission and its work contribute to improving the social and structural determinants of equity. You have to have accountability. You have to have a good ongoing basis to evaluate the impact of your work on the community or people that it serves. We'd like to see a clear vision for your organization, goals and objectives, not for necessarily its programming, but also for its own improvement in governance, management, operations, and programs that will, during the term of the grant, have been informed by a planning process. So do you have a strategic plan in place? Are you following that plan? Is there a vision for the future that is part of your organization? We look for a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion, procedures that respect and advance DE&I within your organization. We like to see that members of the board and staff reflect the diversity of the community that you serve and the vitality of your organization. You must have sound practices for financial management, which includes a lens for sustainability in its planning. If you're asking for one-time funding, even 3-year funding, what happens in year 4? How will you sustain the level of programming that is enabled by our grants in the next 3 years?
When we're looking at responsive grants and general operating support, the main thing to consider here is that this is intended to be the most flexible support that we can provide. You do not need to identify any particular use that it will be applied to. And we want to make sure that we can be as flexible and responsive to all of the work that all of you are doing out in our 20-town region. Identify other funders and commitments. It's important to identify partners with other organizations where it makes sense to accomplish what you are trying to address and meeting the needs of the community. What your long-term funding strategy is going to be, and include obviously this grant as part of that funding strategy, not the sole funding strategy. General operating support can be used for ongoing or new programs and services, as well as administration and infrastructure, and really allows you and your organization to be who you are and what you do. There is no maximum grant request for general operating support. However, most grants range between $20 and $35,000 per year. You can see that there are 1, 2, and 3-year grants available in order to allow you to be planful in the work that you're doing. It is a joint application administered by the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven and the Valley Community Foundation. It is up on the websites, as you can see on the slide. And if you have a responsive grant that ends in 2021, consider applying for general operating support this year. Applications, as I said, are available. Creating or updating your organization's Give Greater profile as part of this process, the application that needs to be done by February 17th, because the application itself, the general operating support application, is due on February 24th. Our application is a read-only process. Because it's read-only, it's important for you to make as compelling a case as possible for all of the work that you're doing up front. Our process is dependent upon the number of applications it has received. Volume will determine what happens between February and July. And you will see that our funding decisions are made by our board after full review of all of the applications that we've gotten. And I should say our boards, because it happens for both New Haven and the Valley. The login screen for online applications is up on the slide right now. For those of you who have been working with us in the past, you know that this is what you see when you apply for a grant with us. If you have not applied to either of our foundations since July 1st of 2019, you're going to need to create a new account and a password, because your existing account and password are no longer active. Applications are accessible by clicking on the application link. The organizations must complete an application for consideration in any of the grant processes that we've been talking about. And there is an eligibility quiz that you must complete in order to move the application forward.
Okay, so now we're going to go through the actual questions that you'll encounter on the responsive grant application. The questions are the same for both processes. It's one door, Valley and New Haven. It's one door, it's one application. So the first thing you'll be asked to put in is your organization information, your employer identification number, the incorporation date, all of this information, how we reach you, and the organization's mission statement and vision. If you are already in the Blackbaud system, if you've done a grant through this system before, that mission will be pre-populated for you. You're welcome to update that, but it will populate for you. That's the beauty of the Blackbaud system. If you are not a 501c3, but you are working with a fiscal sponsor, we will want the fiscal sponsor organization's name and their contact information as well.
As far as contacts for your organization, please list the CEO or board chair for all volunteer organizations. The contact for the request is the person who is most familiar with the grant request. That may not necessarily be the CEO. It's whoever is writing the grant request for your organization.
Right, and as Valerie said, the first part of this process is read only. So there will be no one contacting you in the first process. Before this moves to either of our boards, you will have a phone call from someone who's working with the Community Foundation to understand the depth of your application and a little more about your process.
As far as the request information goes, what is the total amount that is requested? Jackie and I often get this question of how much should I ask for? And we tell everybody, just make sure you ask for what you need. Look at what you are doing in your organization and make sure that you have that reflected in your request. Determine whether or not you need funding for 1 year or multi-year, and specify the amount requested for each of the following years. As you can see up on the slide, you may have year 2022, 23, 24. How did you determine the amount of the request? Share how you got to that amount. Again, include your actual expenses. We know that COVID-19 is impacting everyone, and we want to make sure that we know how it's specifically impacting your work, your org, and your financials. So that last bullet is to the looking at how COVID-19 is affecting you and the work that you're doing.
So ladies, we do have one question that has come through the chat. Is it possible to download the complete application before beginning?
That's a Denise question, and I'm not sure about that. I believe it is. Also, you will get these slides. These slides will be available to you, and these are all the questions that are on the application. So this will give you that, but we don't have all the drop downs that are available. So it's probably better off going into Blackbaud. If you can't see that in Blackbaud, if you can't see a download a PDF, then reach out to Denise Canning. We'll have that contact information at the end. Thank you, Stephanie.
We have another question. What percentage of responsive grant applications are awarded?
That varies year to year, depends upon the volume. Last year we had 75 applications and 72 of them were awarded. We had a great year. We had funds that were available and great applications that came in. We don't know what the volume will be like this year, so we cannot say. It depends on the volume and the amount that is requested. So there's really no simple answer to that question. I'm sorry. Okay.
The questions we have at this time.
Okay, going on. So the next two sections that we're going to talk about are really the bulk of your application. We're asking about outcomes. We are first asking for community impact outcomes. List 1 to 3 outcomes that your organization will achieve during the time period of this request in terms of its impact on your target population or the community. Outcomes are brief. Outcomes are changes in behavior and circumstances of the people you serve, changes in condition in the neighborhood or a system. We'll run a food pantry that's open 4 days a week is not an outcome, it's an activity. The outcome might be 200 families will experience less food insecurity. We'll do job training for 75 people, not an outcome, it's an activity. People in our job training program will secure living wage jobs is an outcome. Then we ask, why are these a priority for you? What conditions exist that you're trying to change? If you're successful, what difference will it make for the people you serve? So this is list 1 to 3 outcomes. What do you plan to do to achieve that outcome? And then collectively, why are these community impact outcomes a priority? This relates back to your mission statement. It relates back to your core of what you do. Going back to those guiding principles, we're asking, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of your program? What tools do you use? Do you use surveys, evaluation forms, meetings? Do you do baseline testing, pre and post testing? Do you ask for feedback? How often do you ask for feedback? So how do you evaluate? And then based on the evaluation you've done in the past, List 3 to 5 examples of how the population you serve has benefited from your programs over the last year. This is the number served, the behaviors changed, retention, completion rates. Not a long answer, 750 words, but this is the meat of your application. This is the biggest part of your application. We'll show you at the end the contact information for Kara Strawn. Kara is happy to speak with you about what you've drafted as your outcomes to make sure that they really are outcomes and that you're expressing what you plan to do in the best way possible.
Jackie's been talking about the community impact, and now I want to talk to you about organizational impact. Again, list 1 to 3 outcomes that your organization will achieve during the time period in terms of the impact on your organizational strength. Again, you have a very limited amount of space as far as outcome goes. You can see 255 characters. What are your planned activities to achieve this outcome? Please make sure that it's less than 500 words. And why are the outcomes above a priority for your organization? As far as impact goes, we want to make sure that your organization has taken steps to address equity within the work that you are doing. Have you, your staff members, or your board participated in any trainings? If so, how do they inform the work that you're doing? Does your organization have any policies and procedures specifically about diversity, equity, and/or inclusion? If you don't have a policy, why not? Are you working on one? We certainly want to know about that. Next are demographics. Very basic information, the total number of people that you are serving, both directly and indirectly. And as far as indirectly, it's not just like, for instance, if you're serving a youth population, you're also serving their family, the community that they are experiencing, perhaps their school community, whatever. So indirect is not only just the individuals that you are serving, but also the entire group that may be experiencing benefit from the work that you're doing. Based on the number that you've given us, we want to see if you can really get even further into your target market, be as specific as you possibly can. Provide us with race, ethnicity, gender, varied abilities, sexual orientation in less than 500 words. The town you served by percentage, and you can do the race and ethnicity by the number of people that you are working with, gender identity, age, and income. An explanatory paragraph, tell us if you're using estimates or why you are not capturing this information at all. We want to make sure that you understand that these are in approximate numbers. If you can make an informed guess, do that and tell us why you did it. And if you don't collect it, just make sure that you tell us why you don't collect it.
So we do have one question that has come through in the chat. What if the organization has not consistently measured its impact for its past activities?
It may be that you're not ready for a responsive grant. It may be that you're better off coming in for a small grant or needs and opportunities grant in the Valley. As I said, this is a competitive process. So it may be that maybe 1 year of funding under your belt from a small grant will give you the time and the space and the resources to be able to collect that data so you can come in making a stronger case next year. That may be an opportunity to not come into the responsive process. If you don't have good outcomes, I'm not sure that you would be as competitive in this process.
Thank you.
Okay, and you could, one thing you can do is if you're using a model that's worked someplace else, you can cite the data that comes from someplace else where this was implemented and is effective. You can use that data if you want to, but it makes it a little harder to relate to our local community. Okay, financial statements. Financial statements, we're going to require you to upload a few things. Your most recently, in addition to what's on the Give Greater profile. That's separate. That's 3 years of financials if you have them. The financials that you are required to upload are the most recently completed fiscal year income and expense, just the numbers, not the full budget, just the income and expense numbers. So if your fiscal year was July, if your fiscal year just ended in June of 2021, then you put that July 20 to June 2021 number in. If your fiscal year ended in December, then you use the December 31st figures for 2021. We also want your current fiscal year for the projected income and expense. So the year that you're operating in right now, what is your projected income and expense? Again, just the numbers that we're looking for. Then we are looking for your general percentages of what comes from what source. This can be, we realize it's different from year to year. It doesn't have to be in a particular year, but in a given year, do you generally get what percentages from these different sources of revenue? What are your program fees and earned income? If you list others, then please give us what those other sources are. But what are your percentages in these areas? We also ask a few questions. We ask you to describe the financial health of your organization. So we want to know about your cash flow, if you have an operating reserve, endowment, or a line of credit that's drawn down or available to you. If you have an endowment or you have an operating reserve, that does not mean we'll say, oh, they have money, they don't need ours. It means we'll say, look, they're good and strong and stable. So please don't hesitate to talk about the positive things about your financial position. We'd like to hear about your board members and committees' roles in fundraising and fiscal oversight. It is important that boards are involved in the fiscal oversight of an organization and in the fund resource development for an organization. So how is your board involved in that? And then we ask, if you do not receive funding from our foundations, how will it affect your operations or your ability to serve? We want to know if a program will not be possible because you don't get this funding, or you'll serve fewer people, or you'll serve fewer hours. What will be the actual impact of not receiving the funding? The attachments that we ask you to also upload are the operating budget, the full line item operating budget, both income and expense for the current fiscal year. And then a projected operating budget for the first fiscal year in which the funds are requested. So the general operating support grants would come in July. Consider an August 1st start to the grant. So wherever August 1st falls in your fiscal year, show us an operating budget for that full first fiscal year that shows our money and what it does for your organization. Not line by line how you will spend our money, but how overall your organization will change as a result of having our funding. For those organizations that provide services statewide, we would like you to pull out an operating budget for the current fiscal year, income and expense for just the 20-town region that we serve. We'd like to know, based on your overall budget, what percentage is happening in our region. And if you have a current strategic plan, we ask that you attach that. We'd love to know what your plans are and how that fits in with the application and what you've requested. And we'll ask you to certify our Give Greater checklist to make sure that you have completed all of that information. Give Greater, you have to complete the full profile. It takes 6 to 8 hours and it must be done by February 17th, a week before the grant deadline. Don't leave yourself 8 hours to get it done and then not be able to get it done. So please start sooner than later. Make sure you click the submit button when you've made those changes and contact Stephanie if you have any questions. Grant reporting, what will happen at the end? If you are successful and you become a grant recipient, then you will have to update your Give Greater profile on an annual basis. You will have an annual report to let us know the progress that you've made toward your outcomes. Your outcomes become your terms of grant. What you have written is what you agree to do. If it changes between now and July, we will tweak those before they become part of the contract. But they are your words. We don't tell you what we want you to do. You tell us what you plan to do. And then subsequent years of funding are conditional based on the progress toward the outcomes. And there's certainly flexibility. COVID happens, things happen. We understand that conditions change. So there's a great deal of flexibility. Do be in contact with us. We'd like to know what our grantees are doing, what challenges they're facing, and how we can help. And that's the end of the presentation. We are at questions. Do we have any open questions, Steph?
No, we do not have any open questions at this time.
Okay. Val, do you want to go over the resources?
So once again, we just want to let you know that we are always available to come and ask us any questions that you have. We have a wonderful resource guide up on the slide right now. Feel free to contact us and we would be more than happy to help you in any way that we can. We really want you to be successful in this process. So I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning. And those of you who are going to be staying on with us, please feel free to do so. We will be starting in just a minute.